So why don't we go ahead and get started? Welcome all, and if you haven't heard me earlier, this is session 1A, how to support a partner with type 1 diabetes and self-care strategies. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jessica Ching, and I'll be your moderator for this session. Just a quick note about me. I have type 1 diabetes myself and have also been a caregiver of a partner with someone with diabetes. All in all, I am a very proud member of the CARB-DM and JDRF community. So I wanted to thank you for coming today. It's really great to have you all here on a Sunday afternoon with our first ever virtual summit. I wanted to let you know that our presentation this afternoon will be broken up into two parts. The first half hour will be focused on self-care strategies for partners in caring for someone else with type 1 diabetes. The second half of the hour will be focused on self-care strategies for those with type 1 diabetes themselves. For those of you with type 1 diabetes, you're welcome to come back and join us at 1:30, although you will likely find this session of interest as well. So I would now like to proudly introduce Diana Naranjo, PhD, who is a professor of pediatrics at Stanford Children's Health. Diana, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your knowledge with us. I will now turn the session over to you.
Can you guys see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. So just a quick reminder that any questions related to COVID should be referred back to the JDRF coronavirus page. And can you guys also see my dictation at the bottom of the screen? Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know how to turn that off. My 2-year-old turned it on, but it's great. So if we have anybody that has difficulty with hearing, they can read what I'm saying virtually, not distracting at all. All right, so how to support a partner with type 1 diabetes is the first part of this talk. And then we'll move into self-care for people that have diabetes. So you're here either because you have diabetes or because you care deeply about someone with diabetes. Coping. Let's talk a little bit about coping. The presence of a chronic illness is a major stressor, and major stressors impact our quality of life in various ways. I think this is almost like such an obvious thing to state right now, given the crisis that's happening globally and how much of a stressor that is. So I'm not focusing necessarily on the interaction between both stressors, diabetes and COVID, but if there are specific questions around that and we have a little bit of time at the end, you can feel free to ask things in the question bar. So diabetes in particular really impacts quality of life, and that's both for the person that has diabetes and for parents, family members, spouses, significant others, grandparents, and everyone else that's adapting to this life circumstance. And oftentimes when we have stressors, we find ourselves responding in ways that are helpful, and then other times we find ourselves responding in ways that are unhelpful. So it's really awkward for me to just sit here talking at you guys and not know who's here, or if your heads are shaking, or if you're watching television. So bear with me. And I usually have a lot of response from the audience, so it's a little bit of a different forum for me. So ways that we are unhelpful and why we are sometimes unhelpful. Well, why do you guys think? I guess just say it in your minds. Why do you think that you're sometimes unhelpful when it comes to supporting someone with diabetes? I think oftentimes the root of the problem is that we feel scared, and fear and helplessness lead us to kind of a knee-jerk reaction and a response that isn't necessarily helpful, but is kind of feeding that hopeless, scared, helpless feeling. So if we don't know what else to do, or if we receive mixed messages from our loved one that has diabetes about how best to help, we oftentimes lash out, and that lashing out becomes anger or frustration or irritability, instead of where we're really actually trying to come from. I have breakthrough background, which is love and support and trying to be helpful. So when you are a support person of someone with diabetes, we really need to understand how and when to help. One of the questions I would ask if we were in the room together is, what kind of support person are you? So I'm talking now as a wife of someone that has type 1 diabetes. My husband was diagnosed 25 years ago when he was already researching and working in diabetes. And then we met in a diabetes related field. We were both in the field. And so I'm both a psychologist and a researcher and the wife of someone living with someone with type 1. And I think for me in particular, learning about what type of help was useful and when I should intervene versus when I need to just back away and let him deal with it on his own was a pivotal part of developing my communication and understanding and actually helping him feel supported in ways that I think he wanted and needed. So one of the most important take-home messages for someone that doesn't have diabetes is that it is so impossible and difficult to understand the massive impact that blood sugars have on your physical, emotional, and social functioning. And I didn't fully understand this. I've taught this for years and years and years and talked about this, but I didn't fully understand this, to be honest with you, until I developed diabetes myself when I was pregnant. And I had massive amounts of insulin. I had lots of highs and lows. And the highs were really, really scary because I was caring for a baby inside of me and didn't want to hurt the baby. And the lows were really scary because lows are just really scary. And I guess what I'm saying is, even though I can talk the talk, it's almost like you have to walk the walk to fully understand it. But if you put yourself in someone else's shoes for a moment, it feels like an emotional roller coaster where oftentimes you're overwhelmed with sensations, you're overwhelmed with like the physical response, and then you have all of this other emotional response, and it's not actually like tied with reality. So oftentimes emotions for someone with type 1 can be very big or small in these circumstances, and it's really hard to know as the partner how to respond to that. And the hardest part is knowing when it is actually about you and when it isn't about you. And so a lot of couples come to therapy seeking resolution around this area where they say, gosh, my partner gets so mad when I'm trying to like assist during a low, and they just start like ranting and raving about it. And I don't know if I've done something wrong or if this is just part of the disease. And so I think one of the most important things to understand here is to sit down with your person that you're supporting and try to get more clarity. Try to understand like what would be helpful, how would it be helpful? And so for us, that meant it was very helpful for me to have a lot of instrumental support. So instrumental support as opposed to emotional support is the procuring of items in the middle of the night if he needs it for lows. It's prognostic, like thinking about what kinds of items we might need and making sure they're on hand. So when COVID went down, everybody was rushing to buy toilet paper, and I was rushing to buy tons and tons of Skittles just to have them because I know that they don't expire. And so, in our earthquake preparedness kit in our basement, we have Skittles. So that sort of instrumental support is the kind that we've talked about that my husband most needs. And the emotional support, he actually likes to talk through things after the fact. So maybe a day later or two, but not right in the moment. And that took me a long time, years and years, to figure out. And when I didn't figure it out, it always felt like it was about me, and it really wasn't about me. So what should you do? I think language is really important. And if you haven't already read the Australian manuscript that details the article that details like what to say, it's a really good one. The ADA wrote one too. I like the Australian one better. They wrote it first, but the American Diabetes Association does have one as well. But these are the big things that I think make a big impact on people's emotions and their functioning. So watching our language, when we help talk about diabetes, talking about things in terms of checking your numbers, checking your blood glucose, monitoring your numbers, noticing your numbers, watching your numbers, anything that is descriptive instead of testing, because testing assumes that there's a good and a bad, a right and a wrong, or some sort of outcome that's better than another. And there's actually no outcome that's better than another. And I know parents especially like roll their eyes when I say this, and they're like, oh yeah, no, we all know that there is an outcome that's better than another. But in the actuality, as long as we know what a number is, we know what we can do. When we don't know what a number is, then you're just shooting in the dark. And so the most important thing is to desensitize this idea that there are good or bad numbers, and instead maybe talk about out of range numbers, or numbers that are not in my target, or high or low instead of good or bad. And then the other thing that I'm a big stickler on is diabetes management, which signifies all the behaviors that I put into diabetes. So all of my choices, all of my things that I do throughout the day versus diabetes control, because diabetes control leads us to this idea that we have control. And while we have control over our actions, we don't have control over our numbers necessarily. And you guys, if you've heard me talk before, you know I say this all the time, and it is true. You can dream about pizza and wake up with a high blood glucose. Absolutely. So the physiological pathways are not as simple as, you know, what a lot of parents like to say when they see an out of range number. They'll say, well, what did you eat? It's like, it's not that simple. It could be, are you on your period? Did you have a huge fight? Are you worried about something? Is there a global pandemic that you're worrying about every single day and lacking sleep? That will affect your numbers. So management, checking in or out of range versus testing good or bad, and control. So helpful and not helpful support from the family. I really like this body of research. It's pretty obvious, but when you think about it, it's not necessarily what comes to mind when we are in the heat of the moment. But there's a whole body of research talked about miscarried helping, which is when someone is trying to be helpful and they end up being hurtful. And it's not because of intent, but it's because of the way something comes off. So in trying to be helpful from a partner's perspective for someone that has diabetes, try to be calm, even if you don't feel calm. Try to be supportive and try to communicate openly instead of having an angry, terse, short communication. And the most important part of this point is actually, if you can't be calm and supportive in your communication when you're talking about diabetes in that moment, I would say don't talk about diabetes in that moment. So, and if the person with diabetes is experiencing an out of range number in that moment, they probably can't have calm communication either. So the most important thing is to first treat a low or high, take some space, decide if this is a good time to talk, and then keep it calm and supportive. I think one of the things that we always forget to do, especially myself, is acknowledging what's going well. I actually just started a 21-day of meditation program, and a lot of it, you do it first thing in the morning, and a lot of it right now is just sort of waking up and acknowledging, what do I have a lot of abundance of in my life right now, and what's going well. And so acknowledging what's going well around diabetes is also really important, because you can easily slip into the blame and shame game or negative confirmation bias. See, I knew that if you were going to do such and such, that's what was going to happen. Well, what did you think was going to happen if you ate that ice cream? You know, that's sort of negative confirmation versus saying, you know, this whole week has been really stressful and really hard, but you've done a really great job just anticipating when things are going to be really difficult for you and taking a break. So it may not even be that I'm acknowledging something that's going well with his numbers or going well with diabetes, but I'm sort of working around that by acknowledging something that's going well so that he gets into a space where he's open to talking about it. I think the shorter and clearer your reminders are, the better, because you don't want to get into the nag. The nagging is not effective, and it is not going to end up accomplishing what you want it to accomplish. So deciding what reminders are helpful, talking about it in advance, and then, you know, dropping a line here and there is the most effective. And that works best when you have clear goals. So your personal goal may be different than your partner's goal. And these questions, so again, I don't know who's in the audience, if your parents or if your spouses or a friend or something else. If you're in a spousal relationship, your goals and their goals may feel very different, and they may feel like the person with diabetes may feel like this is my illness, and understanding that, but also understanding that when you're in a partnership, things also become both of your responsibility, and figuring out which pieces of that are okay. So for example, for me, I acknowledge that, you know, one of my goals is to try to live healthy and to try to live as long as possible. And I believe that that's my husband's goal as well. Now, when I got pregnant and had diabetes, my goal was to really keep my numbers as tight as possible. And I loved being 70. Like, that was magic, because I knew that if I was that low, when I'd have some food, no matter how much insulin I gave for it, it was only going to go up to maybe 110 or 115, which sounds crazy when you're not pregnant. But when you're pregnant, you don't want these numbers that spike, because it's not good for the developing fetus. Now, my husband's goal to support his wife that's pregnant was, I don't want her running around 70. That's low. That's scary. Like, that's scary for someone that's not pregnant and not going with that. So we had very different goals, which led to arguments and very different ways of supporting each other, until finally we were able to sit down and talk through it. And he understood that this was like a different phenomenon than what he was going through, and that the most helpful thing for me was for him just to be emotionally supportive. And the most helpful thing for him was for me to be instrumentally supportive with the procurement of things. And then problem solving together if things aren't working. So if you are punishing out of range numbers, or reminding people things that that aren't helpful, or denying what they're upset or worried about, you're not actually working together on the same team. So figuring out what the goals are and how to problem solve together, and what components are for you to do and what components are for them to do, is going to be the most effective strategy to be helpful. So why nagging doesn't work. What did the doctor say? I don't know. I stopped listening. I love that one. Okay. So I have a little bit of a example I just took from our life the other day. So partner with diabetes is out for a walk and experiences a low. The partner that doesn't have diabetes has a shared monitoring device and gets an alert that the person that's out and about is low. The partner that doesn't have diabetes asked the person before they left the house to take a snack, and the person forgot their snack. And the partner with diabetes was in the middle of an online presentation. That was me presenting for JDRF a few weeks back. And so the partner without diabetes finished up the online presentation, figured out where they were, and drove the person with diabetes some juice. All right, so that may or may not be a typical scenario that happens in your household. That's a pretty typical one that can happen in ours, especially as things get stressful and busy. Adding on children, always, like, you know, diabetes then takes the back seat. Adding on COVID and the stress of that, diabetes again takes the back seat. So different ways of responding. There's emotion-focused responding versus problem-solving responding. And studies show in general that kind of your male-female characteristics, female is more emotion-focused, male is more problem-solving, and that this is, you know, before we had all the kinds of nuances of gender. So forgive me, but the research was done when it was sex, gender, instead of all of the variations that we have now. But emotion focused is much more on how are you feeling? What was that like for you? What's your experience? Versus what can I do for you? How can I fix it? And so responding in empathy versus responding in anger, which is, gosh, that must be really frustrating for you, or picking some sort of adjective that might help explain what the person that's going through it is experiencing, versus how could you do that? Approach versus avoidance, where you confront the problem directly and you decide, okay, I'm just going to talk about this and we're going to get through it, versus I'm just going to tiptoe around it, or I'm not even going to mention it until later when I blow up. And so I wanted to go through each of these responses in relation to the problem that I brought up. So empathizing and validating. Empathizing and validating is this emotion-focused approach. That sounds really challenging. Gosh, I know it must have been hard to have your walk disrupted. I know you wanted to get a good workout in, and it's annoying that diabetes got in the way. I'm sorry you're feeling so overwhelmed. It seems like you were really overwhelmed when you left the house. There were kids that were crying, and you were just trying to rush out. I'm sorry that diabetes got in the way. Validating is understanding the person's emotions and helping them make sense of it. So I understand why you're feeling that way. That makes sense that you're feeling. And then you pick a word. The most important part of the validating, empathizing spectrum is you pick a word and then you see if it's okay. And you don't have to do it like in a therapy way. Did I get that right? But you do it in this like, oh, it makes sense that you're feeling resentful. Pause, look at their face. No, I'm not feeling resentful. Oh, okay, well, what are you feeling? And then you give them a chance to respond. And you really want to resist the problem solving when it's not asked for specifically, unless there's an immediate safety concern. So again, back to instrumental support, just drive the person orange juice, or just ask the person to come home if they're nearby. And you take care of that and they're out of danger, and then you do the empathizing. But the problem solving part of it, where you want to say, gosh, why do you think this happened? Is this going to happen again? Oh, next time, why don't you have orange juice like sitting right by the front door? And gosh, maybe you can have an extra one in the stroller. That's all the problem solving pieces, which may or may not be what the person wants. And so starting with the empathy is a really important piece. So back to my problem. Later that day, the crisis was averted. The person had orange juice. Both partners are now home reflecting on the day. The person with diabetes was irritable because their walk was cut short. They didn't get their workout in that they wanted to for the day. They felt like dragging, and their body just didn't feel good because they had a big low. And the partner was irritable and upset because their online class had been interrupted and their attention wavered. And of course, they then started to argue. So responding in empathy versus responding in anger. Again, this empathy, I can understand with everything going on, it's hard to keep track of things like taking a snack on a walk. Maybe there's a system we can put in place that'll make it easier, which is a bit of problem solving, but trying to go for me not sounding like a nag. Anger. Well, you had to rush out and you were running late since you didn't pack in advance like I told you to, and you didn't take into consideration what I have going on today, and really it's all about you, so thanks a lot. Which one do you think would go over better, and which one would be more helpful in communicating? Probably number one, but I tried both. All right. So at the end of the day, both partners were exhausted, upset. Neither felt heard or understood. And so then you kind of think about approach versus control. And that is now a good time to be talking about this, or do we need to come back to it later? And avoidance is different, where you're suppressing your feelings, or you become sullen and you don't talk, you become distant, or you use passive aggression or a tone over words. And I'm not talking about avoidance, but sometimes you need to delay just because you're both exhausted and it's not the right time. But if it is the right time, an approach perspective would be trying to recognize and actually name the challenging parts of the day, sharing your feelings that the challenges brought up, and then trying to table it and find an appropriate time if you're not exhausted in the near future where you can work things through so that your resentment doesn't bottle up over time. And for us, that was sort of recognizing, gosh, that, online talk that you had was right when both kids were awake, and our toddler wasn't napping and he decided not to nap, and that can be really stressful. You were just trying to do something nice by getting them out of the house so that, I had some time without screaming children in the house, and then diabetes got in the way, and that's really frustrating. And so we used the approach, and then actually decided to table the problem solving until the next day, when we had a Amazon shipment coming where we could restock the small bottles of orange juice instead of like having to pour something in some like kids bottle and take care of it that way. All right, So when it comes to partners, it's really important to fill them in. And this is part where the person with diabetes, so if you want to take these slides later and talk to the person with diabetes about it, needs to answer these questions. Like, what does your partner need to know about diabetes, and how much do they want to know? What language works best for you in your family? You might call something like my sugar or my numbers, and you want your partner to be on the same page with that. What specifically can your partner do to help you? And do you want them involved in medical or educational appointments, or do you want them coming to JDRF events, or do you want them going to a diabetes camp? Like, what is it that you want and need from them? Do you want them to help in self-management? And if so, how? And what would that look like? And how can your partner check in with you about their concerns without becoming the diabetes police? And so having a partner think through these things and decide and talk through them is a really important part of the communication being positive. And then do not forget the positives. There are lots of positives. And the thing that you need to do is to find your strengths and use them. So what do you guys enjoy doing together as a couple or as a family? What are you guys good at? What are your strengths? What is going well in diabetes care? Like I said, there's got to be something that's going well. You're all here, so something is going well. And then how can you build on that? So if you have strengths, like you're a great cook or you're a really good planner, how can you use those strengths for diabetes specifically for supporting each other? And that is at 28 minutes. We have 2 minutes left for questions about the support.
Thank you so much, Dr. Naranjo. That was actually a really great talk. I think you covered a lot of things. So we have one question and one comment. And the comment from Sarah is, if you could please provide the information for the Australian derived reference.
Okay.
And maybe we can put that in the Q&A or the chat.
We can add it to the chat, Jessica. That'd be great.
Yeah, we could do that. And so if you stay on for the following session, we can make that note. And then we have one other question. I know you've suggested a lot of great strategies, but this person had a specific question about, do you have any advice for a spouse whose spouse is the person with type 1 diabetes, and the person with diabetes wants to keep very tight control but gets low multiple times during the same night?
Yes, totally. Loop. T-Slim, you know, all of these these auto suspend devices are really, really instrumental for that specific issue. So if they want to keep really good control, but overnight is scary because they get close to low or low multiple times, I really do think that technology is the answer. You can almost completely eliminate lows with that, and then you don't have to argue about it or fight about it. I can understand why the partner wants to have really tight control, and I can also understand why the partner worries, because it's a really scary time. You're not attending to your diabetes and you're trying to sleep. And if there's other alarms going off like CGM, you're disrupting the sleep of other people in the house, including the spouse. And that sucks. As a partner, I know alarms and beeps really suck. But I do think that these low glucose suspends and loop type or other hybrid concoctions are really nice at flattening the curve. And if that's not available, then I would say talking to the person about what your concerns are and trying to figure out if there's like something in the middle that can make both of you guys sleep easier.
Dr. Naranjo, this is a very interesting response to that question that I thought was really worth bringing up, even though we're a minute over. The person is saying that the artificial pancreas closed loop system does not help because the person overrides the closed loops.
Oh, they override. Okay, yes. So that's a more I think you would have to, it's an individual response, and I have seen a lot of people that do that, and it's why they're overriding. Are they overriding because they think they can do better? Are they overriding because they're anxious and they want to have it even lower than what the device is allowing? And then I think you might need to have some intervention with your endocrinologist and or a psychologist to talk through where that anxiety is coming from and what's actually safe. And then outside of safety, then what's comfortable for everybody that's sleeping together in the same room or the same household, and what the worries are there.
So that concludes this part of the session for partners caring for someone with type 1 diabetes.